Okay, so if you want to open up your Bibles to Daniel chapter 1, we're going to be talking about a story that most of you guys probably learned when you were in second grade. It's one of those stories that's really common that you hear, but then when you get older, you kind of forget about the children's stories. We don't talk about David and Goliath when we get older. We just talk about the other stuff. But there's a lot of really good content in these stories we classify as children's stories that we miss out because we never go revisit them. And this was one that in our Daniel Bible study for youth group, going through it, it just kind of hit me with some stuff, and I'm like, wow, I've never seen that before. And so it's been really impactful for me, so I'd like to share it with you guys. So we're in Daniel chapter 1. And before we jump into the story, I'm the kind of person who likes to get the background to know what's going on before it sets up. I'm the one who wants to look in my map and see exactly where things are. That's just my nerdy personality. So bear with me because I'm going to set the background so you can kind of know what's going on in Daniel. So it's not just some story. The book of Daniel takes place when the kingdom of Israel is already split up into two kingdoms. The northern kingdom is Israel, and the southern's Judah. And the northern kingdom has already been in captivity under Assyria for 100 years because the northern kingdom had terrible kings. They didn't follow God, they were evil, while the southern kingdom had terrible kings with a couple good ones now and then. So Judah, one of the good kings was Josiah. If you guys know the kings, Josiah was the one who found the book of the law and read it and was like, whoa, we are not doing any of this. So he's like, we need to get rid of all the idols, we need to repent, we need to have a revival. And a revival broke out. He changed Israel for the good. Daniel was probably born around when Josiah was king. Whether it was a little bit before or during his reign, it doesn't say exactly, but we know Daniel was a young man when he was taken, so he was probably between Matt Satterley's age and Donovan's age, if you need a perspective. So high school football team, college age when he was taken. Now, Josiah, when he died, his son took over, and as what happens a lot of times is when a guy dies, his sons don't follow in his footsteps. So his first son took over, lasted 3 months, and Egypt took him over and took him as captive. And then his next son, Jehoiakim, took over, and that's where the book of Daniel starts. Jehoiakim's is king, and then the book of Daniel starts. So, if you want to start chapter 1, verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The reason he did that was Jehoiakim refused to pay him tribute. So Nebuchadnezzar's like, I'm going to take you over. It's a nice trade. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia, and put the treasures in the house of God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, king of his court officials, to bring some of the Israelites from the royal family and nobility, young men without any defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. Okay, so this strategy Babylonians had was to take the best, the brightest, the strongest of whatever country they take over and then bring them back home and train them to be Babylonians. Now, this philosophy is found all throughout history. If you look at the Nazis, when they took over a place, what did they do? They took out all the teachers and replaced them with their teachers. And the teachers would say, you know, your parents are wrong. They just don't understand. This is what's right. And even our country, I mean, we come, take over this country, and what do we do to the natives? We say, hey, you don't need to be natives. You need to be like the white man. And we start teaching them all this stuff. Like all throughout history, countries take them over and it's like, let's teach you to be like us. And really, if you think about it, it's a really smart thing the Babylonians did. Because if you want to change a country, who do you deal with? You don't mess with the old people. Because we're stubborn, we get set in our ways, we know what we believe. You're not going to tell me anything. I mean, that's the way you mess with the young people. That you can mold them, you can create them into what you want them to be, and just like the world's going to be different. I mean, look at the state of Minnesota. Just recently we passed the same-sex marriage law. And the way that came about was not by convincing a whole bunch of old people that it's right. They didn't go around and say, well, you guys need to believe this. What they did, what you do, is you start molding the younger generation. Like my generation and younger has been taught for years and years and years, there's nothing wrong with same-sex marriage. There's nothing wrong with this. I mean, it's even to be celebrated. If you go down to the high school and talk to them about what the belief is, they would look at you like, why would you say there's anything wrong? And it's because instead of trying to change in one generation, you change the younger generation, and then the future will be changed forever from that. So that's what the Babylonians would do. They would take the best, the strongest, and get them to believe the Babylonian way, and then everyone else is going to follow. I mean, if it's not right away, it will be eventually. So their goal was to take these people and to change their thinking by giving them a new education. So that's their first step they're doing, changing their thinking by giving them a new education. Teach them one way, and then they'll just follow it. So the next thing, if you look in verse 6, among these were some of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. The chief officials gave them new names. To Daniel he named Belshazzar, and to Hananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. You guys heard those names before? Okay, we know them by their Babylonian names. We don't actually know them by their Jewish names. I mean, it's kind of interesting that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that's Babylonian names. And like that's kind of weird to us. We don't really put a big emphasis on names nowadays. I mean, if we did, we probably wouldn't have kids named Blue Ivy and Apple, and like the latest one's North. I mean, come on, we don't really care what people's names are nowadays. If it's funky, it's cool. Back in Daniel's day, that's not true. Names were given with meaning. Like we even have some weird ones in the Bible like pain in childbirth or different things like that. But Daniel's name actually meant God is my judge. Like Yahweh is my judge. So when he would meet someone, people would connect him with Yahweh. And his friends' names also had meanings to Yahweh, connected with God. Now, what the Babylonians wanted to do was to change their name so they no longer had their identity with God, with Yahweh, but with a Babylonian God. So they changed all their names from godly Yahweh names to these Babylonian names. So Daniel's name became Bel, protect my life, instead of God is my judge. So they took the Jewish God and replaced it with the Babylonian God, and it's like, boom, your new identity is in this God. This is who you are. So they're trying to change their religious loyalties by changing their names. Now, we do this all the time in this world, but it's not as easy to tell. Like, we don't go up to people and be like, your new name is whatever. So, like the Muslim culture does, when someone becomes Muslim, they change their name. Muhammad Ali wasn't actually Muhammad Ali. I mean, he changed it when he converted over. So, but normally what we do in our life is we change who our God is, change what God is. Instead of changing our name, we say, well, you know, my God, he's a loving God. He's not going to send anyone to hell. I mean, because that's my God. My God's a loving God. I mean, all you have to do is be good, and then that's all that matters. You just have to be good, or just kind of good. Like come to church every once in a while. We change who God is. We start taking the God who is of the Bible and we say, I like this God better, this pretty God, this nice God. Or we replace God with other things. We place them and say, work is really important. This is what I need to do. Money is important. We replace God with things. Sex is important. Fun is important. Being popular is important. In Pelican Rapids, sports is important. We have the temple on the hill over here. It's sports. These kids that come into youth group, it's like sports. And I'm like, look at the best athletes who have ever come through Pelican Rapids. What happens? It's not like they go out to the NBA or whatever. Don't put this at such a high value in your life that it becomes your God. Sports, I love sports, but don't put it up here to where that's what you're worshiping and God's down here. So easy to do with everything, with family. Family is a good thing, but don't put it so far high above God that you leave God behind. Okay, let's go on to the next part. Verse 8. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief officials for permission not to defile himself this way. Now God has caused the official to show favor and sympathy to Daniel, but the official told Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other men your age? The king would then have my head because of you. Daniel then said to the guard, whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servant for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and waters to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So then he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and gave the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. Okay, so what we learn here is that we all need to be vegetarians. Oh, apparently you don't believe me. Okay, that's not what it's saying at all. You can actually find books that like the Daniel diet and living the Daniel way, and it talks about eating vegetables, which totally is not what this is talking about. You can think that if you want to, but that's not what it's talking about. But think about what Daniel's doing. Living in the court of the king of Babylon. So the king of Babylon probably has average food, or he has the best food that's out there. The king of Babylon's going to have the choice food. If there's something really good that's grown and way across somewhere else, he's going to have it in his palace. He demands the best. So what these guys are eating is the best food and having the best wine, and they're living the life. And Daniel says, I don't want to eat this. I would rather eat vegetables and drink water. Now, a couple weeks ago, we re-roofed my house, and I would like to say, and there's some people who probably would agree with me, that my wife is a good cook. She makes good food, and some people might have just come to help out because she makes good food, not because of other reasons. Now, if someone would have come into my house to eat, and they would be like, no, I don't want any of that. Could I just have veggies and water? We would have looked at them and be like, okay, no, seriously? And if they would have done that, we would have mocked them endlessly. Man, this cupcake is really good. Or this food's really good. This potato salad's really good, right, Chad? We would be heartless to them. Man, those veggies, those look good. You wouldn't want this anyways. So you can imagine Daniel saying no to this food. He would have got ridiculed like crazy. The guys would have been like, this is good steak. Sorry you're eating that broccoli. So first of all, you have that. But why would Daniel refuse to eat this food? It's because he said he doesn't want to defile himself before God. Now, the Bible doesn't come out and say this is the reason why he doesn't want to defile himself. But we have some good educated guesses. First, Jewish people followed a kosher diet. So they didn't eat pork, they didn't eat stuff with blood in it. Babylonians, they didn't care, they ate whatever. So they ate pork, they ate stuff with blood in it, they were far from kosher. So Daniel, not wanting to defile himself, says, no, I don't want that stuff. Another thing is a lot of countries would sacrifice animals to their gods. They would sacrifice it and then they would take the meat and serve it later on. So the meat they would be eating would be idol meat. And then you would be eating this and it would be sacrificed to God, and that's a big red flag. Don't eat food sacrificed to idols. So it's probably one of those two things, could be something else too. But Daniel looked at it and said, my relationship to God is more important than eating this food right here. And he drew a line, like it's silly, it's food. It's food. But Daniel says, no, my relationship to God is more important. I'm going to sacrifice because I love God that much. How many of us would be willing to do that today? I mean, think about it. Like, it's easy here to sit here and say, yeah, I would not eat food. I would just eat veggies and water for the rest of my life to keep my relationship with God right. But then the question goes, what happens if it's not food? What happens if it's something else in our lives that's defiling our relationship with God? Like movies or TV. Your favorite TV show, you love it, it's just great. It's your secret little passion that you kind of keep hidden, you don't talk to people about because you're kind of embarrassed you watch it. What happens if that's defiling your relationship with God? Are you willing to say, I'll quit watching that? My best friend, some of his college friends, invited him to go to a movie one time. And he said, yeah, sure, I'll go. And he knew nothing about it, but he knew after the movie started in the movie theater that he probably shouldn't be watching this stuff. And so he sat there with the burden of, what do I do? I'm sitting here, what I'm watching is not helping my relationship with God. And so he stood up and walked out of the movie theater and sat in the lobby. Like, I don't know about you, that's awkward, sitting in the lobby of a movie theater. There's not very many people, it's just awkward. And so he waited the whole movie until his friends got done, and then they came out, gave him a hard time. Oh, you couldn't watch this movie, huh? You're too goody two-shoes. But he's like, I had to draw a line in the sand and say, I'm not going to put this into me because I know what it's going to do to my relationship with God. And that's a hard step to take. A very hard step to take. And maybe it's not like movies or TV, maybe it's music. Like, music is a powerful thing. It's catchy, it gets in your head, it makes you emotional, it makes you, oh, I just love this person. It gives you thoughts, and it gives you emotions that you don't normally have. And what happens if there's some music you're listening to that is really good, really fun to listen to, but you know it's not doing good things inside of you? Now, I'm not saying you need to give up secular music, because, you know, there's some really good secular music out there. There's some really good stuff to listen to. But I'm saying you need to evaluate what you're putting into your life and see what it's doing to your relationship with God. I mean, it's not going to be easy to give some of this stuff up, but it will be worth it. I guarantee it. So you need to evaluate, like, your TV watching, your computer usage, your friends, everything you're putting into you, evaluate it and see if it's beneficial. Because one thing I've learned in my life is that when you start to compromise in the small areas, it's easier for it to snowball into the other areas. So don't compromise in the small areas and put God on the back shelf, because that's easy to do. So what do we learn from this passage? What do we learn from this passage? Just like the Babylonians, Satan tries to do these tricks in our lives. He does three things to lead us from God. And the first thing is to change our thinking by giving us a new education. Everything in the media, everything that we read, we watch on TV, is just so full of Satan's propaganda, trying to tell us this is right, this is wrong, this is right, this is wrong. Like, parents, if you're relying on the church and the school to teach your children, I'll tell you this right now, that you're going to be in trouble. And the reason I say this is because you wouldn't believe what's being taught in school. And I'm not talking about what the teachers are teaching. The teachers are doing a pretty good job. It's what the students are teaching each other. The conversations that go on in our grade school system would shock you. It's conversations that are in, like, you would think maybe high schoolers or college students are having. It's the reason why we have, like, a good handful of junior hires getting pregnant every year. Like, we have these students who don't have parents that are raising themselves, that are filling themselves with this junk, and they're starting to pass it on to every other kid. And if we as parents and we as the church don't start coming in and start telling them the truth, then we're going to be shocked. Like, I brought my kid to church every week. Why aren't they following God? I mean, who are your kids with more every day? The church or their friends at school? I mean, I see kids at best for youth group, like 3 hours a week, 2 hours a week if they come. So I have 2 hours to try to teach them stuff. Sunday school teachers have 45 minutes to teach them stuff. And then they're in the school system. Now, I'm not saying you need to homeschool or do all this stuff, but I'm saying as parents, as people of the church, our job is to speak truth into the lives of these kids. Because Satan, he has his fingers all over everything they're hearing. And if we're not pointing our kids in the right direction, then who's going to do that? So as parents, the Bible says it's our responsibility to talk about God's commands around the table. Talk about them wherever you go. Take the chance to talk with people because Satan is trying to change our thinking. We already see how he's done it in our country. And so take control of your family. Speak truth, God's truth to your kids every day. Okay, the second thing Satan tries to do, he tries to change our religious loyalties. And the way he does it, like I said earlier, is just try to change what we value. Tries to take God out of God's seat and put something else there. So be careful on what we start placing value on. It's easy to get caught up in the things of the world, of money, of all this stuff. But we got to pull back and keep perspective on what's important. Okay, the third thing Satan tries to do is try to change our lifestyle by making us make compromises. Like the best example I have of this is college students. Kids who leave the church, go to college, a lot of times what happens is they fall away. And why is that? It's because Satan gets them to compromise in just a little area. I mean, just one little drink. I mean, then he'd take a little bit more stuff. Every compromise we make, it's easier to get farther from God. And then eventually, they either get so caught up in what they're doing, they forget about God, or they get so much guilt in their lives that it's like, God would never take me back. Do you know what I've done? And that's what happens in our lives too. We just compromise, and get so far away from God that we just get guilty and we're like, oh, do you know what I've done? God wouldn't take me back. And that's one of Satan's best lies is, you don't deserve God's love. Look what you've done. And it's true, I don't deserve God's love. That's, boom, he's telling me half-truth. But God's like, there's nothing you can do to run far enough away from me that I'm not going to take you back. I mean, the prodigal son is a great example. You can run, do all this stuff, and if you're just like, what did I do? And turn back, God is there, and he runs to you. So his goal is to make us compromise so that we leave God behind and do something else. Okay, so the way we stand firm in the midst of these attacks that Satan does is by staying grounded in his word. It's something I've been trying to stress so much with our youth kids since coming back from Chicago. Stay grounded in his word. You need to be reading the Bible. You need to be reading what God tells you, because if you're not, it's easy for stuff to plug in and start telling us what truth is, and we forget what God's truth is. And then we need to, and if you have a problem with that, find someone who can send you a text message and say, hey, you should check out this verse today. Check out these verses. Have someone holding you accountable with that. And you need to apply what you read. Don't just read the stuff and be like, yeah, that's good stuff, and just forget about it. I mean, that's pointless. You might as well just not read anything if you're not going to apply it. Then the next thing we need to do is be praying. We find out in Daniel later on, he gets in trouble for praying. And he prays 3 times every day. Every day he sets aside 3 times and he prays. He's getting connected with God. He's talking with God. He has that being plugged back in, getting charged again. And then the last thing I will say is put Christian people around you. Daniel was not alone. We heard that he had 3 other friends with him. And they were there with him. And you think it was hard sometimes eating their broccoli going, man, that looks good. Of course it was. But the fact that they had other people living their lives the same way makes it easier. I mean, Proverbs 27, let me make sure I have it right, 27:17 says, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. If we think we can live this Christian faith by ourselves, we are mistaken. We need to have other people spurring us along so that when we get tired living the life, that they can grab us and say, come on, keep on going, keep on going. So stand firm and expect these things to happen, because it's going to happen. My last thing is just the desire to live your life in such a way that's worthy of the calling you have received. Because God's called us out of darkness into this light, and sometimes we take that for granted. We just sit there and say, thanks, God. And we don't do anything. But God's like, come on, live for me now. Shine my light. So let's pray.